Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the basics of the command line, which includes the composition of a command, some basic commands, and a series of examples to explain them to you. First of all, in this context, in the future, we will actually manipulate commands through some consoles. Here, we can use the console to parse commands and execute their functions. For example, we can query some things, configure some things, and manage them. This actually includes command keywords, parameter names, and parameter values. Of course, if you can't remember them, it's okay. We just need to know how to use the command in the future. For instance, if we want to check the status of an interface and display interface information, we would use display IP interface J000. This command displays the information for the 0 to 00 interface. Here, display is our command word used for displaying or restarting in the future. These are the functions of the command. Next, if you want to perform a task like checking its IP, the keyword here is IP, but which specific value or parameter is it? Which interface exactly are we referring to here? The parameter name and parameter value identify the interface parameter value G000, and this is essentially how it is structured. So, in the future, any commands you encounter will also follow this kind of structure. Now let's take a look. If I use these devices in the future, there are some command views within them. For example, when we access a device, after we open the device, we will see a prompt with the Huawei symbol. Here, the angle brackets indicate a user view, which means you can check the status of the device and some of its statistical data. In the future, if we want to configure, we need to enter the system state. If you see square brackets with Huawei, it means you have successfully entered the system view. How do you enter it? We will explain the system view later, where you can input other commands. Besides this, there are also protocol views. For example, if we configure OSPF in the future, OSPF might involve creating areas or announcing a concept, which needs to be done under the OSPF view. Besides these, we also have BGP, which is one of our routing protocols. There are some parameters inside that we need to configure. Apart from these, we also have an interface view. This means that under the interface, if we want to configure some IP and other parameters in the future, we need to enter the interface. In other words, I only operate on this interface. First, we need to enter the system view from the user view. Finally, we enter the interface view, or the protocol view, or other views. The device provides various configuration and query commands, and to make it convenient for us to use, these commands are organized. They are registered in different views, allowing us to perform a series of configurations based on these views, if within this context. After seeing this view in the future, we can actually switch back and forth. When we first access a device, we will initially enter its user view. In the user view, if we want to enter the system view, how do we do that? It's done through a command called system. So through this command, after entering the system view, we can then simply utilize the parameter interface J001 to enter the interface view from the system view. Alternatively, we can also enter such a protocol view through OSPF1. In the interface view, for example, as we see here, after entering the interface view, the previous section will add a G00 and we can configure some IP addresses within it, and also perform some other operations. If in the future you want to exit this view, then enter this command, where this command takes us back to the previous view. If returning from the interface, it goes back to our system. And if returning from our protocol view, it also goes back to our system. If you return from the system view, it goes back to our user view. Here, if you want to quickly return from the interface view to the user view, or from our protocol view back to the user view, you can use the return commands here to go back to the initial view, which is the user view. With these commands, you can it can configure a series of commands under these views. Of course, if you don't want to use return, we will also teach you some shortcuts later on which you can use to return. For example, here we can use Ctrl+Z to quickly achieve a return. We say that the command line of the device actually provides basic command editing functions, such as allowing us to backspace. We delete the characters in front of the cursor and move the cursor forward or to the left, but when the cursor has already reached the beginning of our command, it will give an error what. Additionally, here we can use the left arrow key or Ctrl+B to move our cursor one character to the left. And similarly, we can use the right arrow key or Ctrl+F to move our cursor one character to the right. Of course, if the cursor has already reached the end. If the cursor has already reached the beginning or the end, an alert will be generated. Besides these, our device actually supports incomplete keyword input. For example, if I want to input the system wave we mentioned earlier, sometimes people can't fully remember the specifics of each word. In that case, we can type an abbreviation like SY and press enter, and it can still recognize it. For instance, if we want to search for something here, we can use such abbreviations as a substitute. For example, if we want to display all the current commands, we would typically need to input a long string of English. However, here when I input DQ2Co, how do we configure the command? It will also be recognized, but if you input something too simple like D-C or disk, then because the string DC or disk might match many commands, it won't be able to help you find it. Besides inputting abbreviations, we can also use the tab key to achieve auto-completion. For example, if we input a command and only this command contains these characters, we can press the tab key and it will automatically complete it for us. However, if the word we input is complete, even if we press the tab key multiple times, it won't change. For instance, here with info, we want to use the tab key to complete it. After we press the tab key, it will automatically complete it to info center. If the characters we input match multiple keywords, we can repeatedly press the tab key. Then the system will automatically cycle through the words that start with the input characters to help us find what we need. For example, here I input InfoCenter log, and when I press the tab key, it might have these three options. It will display one option with the first tab press, then the next option with another tab press, and so on. Let's try another one. If the string we input cannot be recognized as any keyword, then after pressing the tab key, nothing will change with the input, because we can find him, and we can think of more keywords. In this case, we can also use the command line for online help. For example, if we really forget, because when we are working on a project, it's impossible for us to remember every vendor, every piece of equipment, and every command. So what do we do? Now, besides searching online, we can also use the command line for online help to get real-time assistance. This way, we don't have to remember a large number of complex commands. Online help can be divided into full help or partial help. If we want to access this online help, we need to type a question mark when entering a command. For example, if I want to get all the help, here I just type a question mark in this display view, and it will tell me what I can type in the current view. The part before the command is the command itself, and the part after it is an introduction to the command. This means, for example, what the command will look like after you type it and what it means. This is full help. If you need partial help, for instance, if you forget the word that comes after D, you can type a question mark after D. What commands start with D? Based on this, we can find the commands we are interested in or want. If during this process, we search for these commands in our system and find that the command does not exist, then our device will immediately notify you of the issue. For example, here we say, originally it was a renaming operation. However, you haven't told it what name you want to change it to in the future. For example, if I want to rename it to R1, I would type space R1. Since you haven't informed it here, it will prompt you, telling you that it cannot find a complete command at this position. So when we encounter this situation in the future, we need to perform a series of fillings at the position indicated by the arrow. What does this command mean? This command is telling you that at this position, no recognizable commands have been found. It means you typed it wrong, so quickly check if you have entered the command completely. Besides this, if you only type an A, it will tell you that at the position indicated by the arrow, there is more than one command matching this keyword, meaning that there are too many commands starting with A. Which one do you want me to find? I really don't know. So here it will tell you to input a bit more specifically. Besides these, for example, if I type this command here and it also reports an error, it tells you that we found an incorrect parameter here. So what if we type a command incorrectly? We want to undo it, and in this case, we need to use the word undo at the beginning, go, which means I want to cancel this command. So when we say cancel this command, it's usually used to restore default settings, disable certain features, or delete some configurations. For example, right now I want to undo this command to restore the current default configuration. So what should we do? For example, right now I first enter the user view through System Wave to get into our user view. In the user view, if I decide I don't want to rename anymore, then I use undo followed by the command to indicate that I want to cancel the renaming operation. So, if we want to execute a cancel command or disable this function, for example, during this process, we also add an undo FTP server in front of it to cancel an FTP function. If I now want to revoke a command, cancel a command, or delete some configurations. For example, if I don't want to configure the IP address for everyone here, I would also add an undo in front. In short, if in the future you want to delete something or cancel something, try adding undo in front of the command to cancel it. Besides those mentioned earlier, I also told everyone that our device actually provides shortcut keys, allowing us to speed up and simplify the input of commands. What about command shortcuts? They are actually divided into customizable ones and some that are built into the system. If you want to customize a shortcut here, there are 4 user-definable options, such as Ctrl plus G plus L plus O plus U. We can combine this user-defined shortcut key with any command. Once combined, when we press the shortcut key, the system will automatically execute the commands associated with the shortcut. For example, if I want to combine Ctrl and L with this command, I would bind them using a command like this. What system shortcut keys are there besides? First, there's Ctrl plus A, which moves the cursor to the beginning of the current line. Ctrl plus B moves the cursor 1 character to the left. Ctrl plus C is used to stop the current command. Ctrl plus E moves the cursor to the end of the current line. Finally, Ctrl plus X deletes all characters to the left of the cursor, essentially canceling everything. If it's Ctrl plus Z, well, Ctrl plus Z performs an operation that deletes the character at the cursor and all characters to the right of it. Ctrl plus Z also means returning to the user view. Regardless of which view you're in, I can bring you back with Ctrl. Adding our right parenthesis, this represents terminating the current connection or switching to another connection. We also need to understand some basic configuration commands. Here, let's take a look. First, if it's PDD, this means we want to check the current directory. If here it is dir, we input dir to display some detailed information in the current directory. If it's more, it means to display more of the text file content. If it's cd, it is used to change the current working directory. If it's mkdir, it means I want to create a directory. However, in reality, although our VRP can use this file system to manage files and directories on the device, we don't actually use it much. Mainly, protocols are used for routing communication and controlling. Besides these, there are also commands like rmdir to delete a directory, copy to duplicate, move to relocate, rename to change the name, and delete to remove. These are all a series of operations related to files. Additionally, we can recover files that have been deleted, including those permanently removed from the recycle bin, as the space in the recycle bin is limited. If the recycle bin is full, you won't be able to delete more files or directories. If I want to configure the name of the system, we do it by following this with the name of our device. Generally, if the network has multiple devices deployed, we need to manage and configure them uniformly. However, when we debug our devices, they all start with a default name upon booting, which is Huawei. For the AR series, they are all called Huawei, and for our S series switches, they are also Huawei and default, so we need to rename them here. Otherwise, if there are too many devices in the future, it will be confusing when configuring them. Problems can easily arise in the later stages. We can also adjust our system clock using this command. Why do we need to adjust the system clock? To achieve synchronization and coordination with other devices. It's impossible for me to say it's 8 o'clock now and we're in the same city. You're right next to me and you say it's 7 o'clock. Then in the future, if I say I'll meet you at 8, then you look at 8 o'clock, but due to our clocks not being synchronized, coordination fails. At this point, we can set a local time zone for it and also set the UTC date and time. So why do we need to set the date and time? It's to synchronize with the standard time, specifying our region and designing its settings. The current time, in this way, we can achieve more accurate information synchronization. So, if within this context there's a need to adjust for daylight saving time, you can use this command to make a series of adjustments. If in the future we want to set the configuration level of a command within a specified view, we can define what the view is, what the level is, and what the command you want to change is. Here, we can set it. For example, the command level can be set to access level, monitoring level, configuration level, or management level can be represented by the numbers 0, 1, 2, and 3 respectively. As we mentioned before, for example, I now have 4 administrators. I want administrator A to be able to set save by themselves, while the other administrators, although they are all level 3 administrators and theoretically can set all commands, I don't want them to have the corresponding permission. So we can change the level of the save command in the corresponding view to allow this level 4 administrator A to operate it. In the future, if we want to set up this user in a login mode, we need to enter its user interface called user interface VTY04. Just like when we use a network cable or fiber optic to connect to a device, we have an interface. In the future, when someone remotely logs into our system, this user interface also has such an interface. After entering, we can configure the current authentication mode for it. Here we can also configure this VTY as a console. Once configured as a console, we can set it up for console access, meaning the device is right next to us. We connect to the console port using a console cable for debugging. As for VTY, we can configure it for remote login. Here, 0 to 4 means I can have up to 5 users logging in and accessing simultaneously. This value can be set to a maximum, actually allowing up to 15 users to log into the device simultaneously through VTY. We can set this using the maximum VTY number command in the user interface. If we set the maximum number of login users to 0, it means we cannot log into the device via Telnet or SSH. So in this context, if we want to check how the device is configured in the future, we can use the command called display user interface to view information about the user interface, and according to the device type and the version of the VIP being used. This is to specify because the maximum number of VTY interfaces may vary with different versions. Besides these, we can also set the user connection timeout ratio. It is said that now, if I don't input a command within a specified time, for example, how many minutes and seconds, then I will disconnect the current connection. By default, it's 10 minutes, meaning if you don't manage this device for 10 minutes, the connection might disconnect, and if you want to use it again next time, you will need to reconnect. If we want to enter the actual physical interface to configure some things, we use the interface command. For example, we enter the interface corresponding to a specific interface number, and then we configure the IP address for it. This IP address configuration can be applied to either a physical interface or a logical interface using this command. Besides these, we can also display what we have configured on the current device by using the display CEO command. After completing the configuration, if we want to save it, we need to use the save command in the user interface to perform the save. If in the future we want to check the current configuration status, we can use display save configuration to see what configurations we have saved. In the future, if we want to run this IP address service on an interface, we must assign an IP to that interface. Generally, one interface corresponds to one IP. For example, if you configure multiple IPs on the same interface, like a second, third, or fourth one, the newly configured IP address will replace the previous one. After configuring the IP address, remember to also add the subnet mask. The mask, it can be represented shown in the form of something like 25v5, 25v5, 255v12 to indicate the subnet mask. Alternatively, we can use an Arabic numeral, such as 24. To configure the mask using this kind of length, to display it is also possible. Besides these, we also have logical interfaces which can actually be configured in this way as well. For instance, in the future, if we enter the loopback interface, such as interface loopback 0, this is just to simulate having such a network segment behind it. Or if I want to use such an interface as a management address, because it is virtual, once you configure it, it doesn't behave like an actual physical interface. If my interface, well, has some issues today or some problem arises tomorrow, and this interface unexpectedly shuts down, this virtual interface won't do that because it is virtual. For example, it will never shut down, making it very stable in comparison. Therefore, many management ports use this loopback interface for management. It is a loopback interface, meaning it is virtual, but you can also configure it using such an IP address. So if, after we configure an IP address for an actual physical interface, we need to check the physical status of the interface. Generally, Huawei routers and switch interfaces are enabled, but if an interface is manually disabled, for example, how do you disable it manually? In the future, if you enter the interface and input shutdown, then this is how we manually disable it. And to cancel it in the future, you use undo shutdown to learn how to cancel it. This is our IP address configuration. If in the future you want to save it, be sure to remember that it is saved under the user view, and it cannot be saved under our system view. It is a requirement of the protocol. If in the future you are not satisfied with what you have saved, you can also use reset to reset our saved configuration or clear our saved configuration. If during this process we want to display the current and next startup system files or backup startup files or license files, also patch files and voice files, you can use this command to display a series of items. For the configuration file of the next startup, it needs to be accessed through. During a device upgrade, we can use this command to configure the device so that the specified configuration file is loaded the next time it starts. Besides these, if we need to restart the device in the future, we can use the reboot command to perform a series of restarts. Next, let's look at some examples to analyze for everyone, such as examining file query commands and directory operations. Here we check the files and directory information in the current directory of a router named RTA. Alternatively, we can create a directory named test and then delete this directory. First, after entering this device, we query its files and directories. After checking, we can choose to create using this command. Once created, if you want to see if it was successful, you can display it, and here it will tell you can see that. Currently, we created a file or directory at a certain time, and its name is test. If you want to delete it in the future, you can use rmdir to delete what you want to remove later. The name of the directory to be deleted, if in the future you want to perform an operation on a file, for example, if we want to rename the file Huawei TXT to save zip, and also create a copy of this save zip file, naming the copy as file.point, then here we use rename. In the front is our previous name, and at the back is a new name. Here you can see that its name has changed to save.zip. By copying it, a duplicate will be generated. We can define the name of the duplicate at the end. After defining it as this file txt, if we then use dir to query it, and we can see it, there is a duplicate here, B, and its file name has been renamed by us. Now, if we want to move this file to the DHCP directory in the future, we might even want to delete this file and recover a deleted file. Here, we can use subsequent commands, such as using move to relocate the file to a specific location. By opening the DHCP directory, we can see that it has indeed been moved inside. After moving it in, what if you want to delete it in the future? You would use delete followed by the file name, and when you check again, you'll find that the file is gone. If you accidentally delete it and want to recover it, you can use and delete to restore it. And when you check the file again, it will be there. Now, if we want to configure the router in the future, let's say we want to assign the IP addresses shown in the diagram to the router and this PC, which means 192.181 and 192.168.1.2, and allow some other users in the company, some other employees, to use the password Huawei 123 to remotely log into this router through the PC, allowing them to view the configuration but not modify it. Also, we need to save and name it as the Huawei zip configuration file, and set this file as the configuration file for the next startup. Now let's take a look at the operation. First, we take a device here, and of course we need to rename it. We need to enter the system view to change the username, then enter the interface to configure the IP address. After configuring the IP address, we can return to our system view, and here we configure what happens when a user logs in the future. The situation of the user interface. First of all, enter this user interface to configure a type for him, or then you can choose password authentication. This means that as long as you enter the password correctly, it will work. Here, it will ask you to enter your login password and what is the maximum length. The maximum is 16 characters, so you can enter, for example, Huawei 123 here. You can set this yourself, and in the future, if the device logs in, its corresponding permissions can be set. Since we don't want it to make changes, we only allow it to view. Actually, in this case, one level is enough. Once everything is set up, we can use this command to return to our upper level view, which means going back to our system view. This command configuration might vary depending on the model of the device, and you might need to manually enter another command. So, for more detailed information, you can refer to the product documentation more. By the way, if you're interested in the product documentation or need it, you can message me privately and I can provide it to you for free. Now, once the configuration is complete here, we need to save it. If we want to save it here, we use the save command followed by the name you want to save it as. Of course, you can also just press enter without typing the rest, and it will generate a default file name for you, depending on the situation. If we configure it here, it will ask us whether we want to save it to the configuration file named Huawei.zip. We can input yes or no based on the situation. It will inform you that saving the configuration file will take a few minutes, so please wait. If everything is fine, it will pop up with a message telling you that all configuration files will take effect after activation. In the future, if we don't configure it here, by default, it will be saved to a file called vrpcfg.cfg. We can also create a folder to save the configuration. For the VRPI, V5 and V8 versions, they actually have the same command that we can use to specify the next storage configuration file, but the saved file itself is different. If we want to specify the configuration file for the next startup, we execute it through this command. After the configuration is completed, if you want to check it, you can do so. Use display startup to see, and at this time it will show you the software of the system for the next startup as well as the backup system file for the next startup, and as we mentioned here, such as what is the save configuration file for startup? It will tell you what the save configuration file for the next startup is, and you can use this to check whether the configuration was successful. We previously discussed that the VRP system version is divided into V5 and V8. V5 is mostly used for enterprise-level routers or switches, such as the S series and AR series. And what about our VRP V8? It is often used for CE, including NE, which are aimed at data centers. In data centers, we say that many configurations require precision and cannot be applied immediately upon configuration. If it takes effect directly, without the network administrator checking, it could lead to some irreparable consequences. So here we say that VRP v5 and v8 actually have similar commands. But what about VRP v5? It has running and startup configuration databases, but no candidate configuration database. So here, once our commands are configured, they take effect immediately without needing to be committed. However, in VRP v8, all commands must be committed after configuration to take effect. These differences are important for everyone to understand, including some of our basic commands. If in the future you want to learn about Huawei certification technology or wish to obtain our Huawei certification question bank, feel free to message me.